What's up, y'all? Now we back with another one. Okay, you know how they say reading is fundamental, but I think there should be a couple things that you should learn in school that they don't teach you, and you got to be disabled or in a special school to learn. And this shout out to my aunt because she had surgery on her eyes and shit. That's when my mom was in North Carolina, whatever. And I'm saying that people should be prepared for old age or if something go wrong. Meaning learn sign language, learn Braille, and learn another language. And it'll help if it ain't going to fix the problem, but it'll make it better. Adapting and learning how to be in a new world or how you perceive it now that you had a disability or a shortcoming. So let's get it.
This is Grade 1 Braille in one lesson. Braille is based upon a grid of dots small enough to fit under the tip of your finger. These dots are numbered 1 through 6, and when raised in different combinations, represent different letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. Each Braille character, or cell, can be described by saying which of the dots are raised in that cell. For instance, this is a 1 cell, this is a 2-5 cell, this is a 3-4-6 cell, and this is a 1-2-3-4-5-6 cell, otherwise known as a full cell. Braille is actually very easy to learn. Most of it is based upon the first 10 letters of the alphabet, A through J, and these letters only use the top 4 dots in each cell. Because of the importance of these particular letters, we'll spend just a minute trying to memorize them, and we'll do that with a story. One day, you decide you want to cross a river. So you approach a bridge, but it's closed. So you take the detour, but realize you're on empty. So you fill up with fuel, but now you're in gridlock. So you trade your car for a Harley, turn the ignition on, and jump over the river. Each of these words begins with the letters A through J, and each of the symbols represent the raised dots within each letter. Let's go through the story one more time. You approach a bridge, but it's closed. So you take the detour, but realize you're on empty. So you fill up with fuel, but now you're in gridlock. So you trade your car for a Harley, turn the ignition on, and jump over the river. This same pattern of dots used for letters A through J is repeated over and over again in Braille with just a few small changes. If you can remember letters A through J, you've pretty much learned Braille. So let's take away the symbols and add 2 more rows of cells that have the exact same pattern of dots as letters A through J. We'll use the second row to represent letters K through T. And to make these cells different than the first row, we'll also raise dot 3. For letters U through Z, we do the same thing, except we raise both dot 3 and dot 6. For now, we'll discard the rest of the cells on this row, as we won't see them again until we get to Grade 2 Braille. But wait, what about the letter W? Well, Braille was invented by a French teenager, and in classical French, W isn't used. However, it was added as a special character later. For now, we'll simply add it to the end of the 3rd row and put it in its proper place when we come to Grade 2 Braille. We now have all 26 letters of the alphabet in Braille. So let's look at numbers. We have already used 26 out of the possible 64 Braille characters that can be created out of 6 raised dots. So let's reuse letters A through J for numbers 1 through 9 plus 0. But wait a minute. When we read these characters, how do we know if they represent letters or numbers? Well, there's actually a special character that will come before a set of numbers that will let you know that, hey, these next set of characters are actually to be treated as numbers. So let's move over the cells that we've created so far and make room for this special character. And here it is. This basically looks like a backwards L, and you can think of it as turning letters into numbers. Once it's on, it stays on, and all the characters you read after this character are considered numbers. But what if we want to go back to using letters? Well, we just used another special character to turn off the numbers and go back to letters. So what about capitalizing letters? Everything we have seen so far is lowercase. If we want to capitalize something, we just use a very simple Braille character, and it's just the number 6 dot raised. The character that immediately follows this character is considered capitalized. This isn't like with the number symbol, where once it's on, it stays on. The capitalized character only works for the very next character. So now we have our letters and numbers, but no punctuation marks. In Grade 1 Braille, these are the only types of characters you will encounter: letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. Grade 2 Braille is meant for more advanced Braille readers and condenses multiple letters or even whole words into a single character. Grade 2 Braille allows Braille books to be shorter than they otherwise would be if they were written entirely in Grade 1 Braille. So to finish up Grade 1 Braille, we will need to look at the cells that represent punctuation marks. Most of the standard punctuation marks can be found along another row of cells that are also a variation on the raised dots in letters A through J. So let's move up the cells that we have looked at so far and make room for this additional row of cells. This time, instead of raising an extra dot to differentiate these cells from letters A through J, we're actually going to move all the raised dots in this row down one position. The punctuation marks on this row don't follow any particular pattern, but they are still fairly easy to memorize. And here they are. Some of these cells represent multiple punctuation marks at the same time, such as the open quote and the question mark. The fifth character doesn't represent a punctuation mark, but we'll keep it in here for consistency's sake. Finally, on the left-hand side is another punctuation mark that doesn't fit the same pattern of raised dots, and that is the decimal point. So now we're looking at all the cells used in Grade 1 Braille. So based upon what we have learned, see if you can tell what word is represented by these cells. Feel free to pause the video if you'd like. So the first two cells we know are from letters A through J, because only the top 4 dots are raised. The third cell is from the second row of letters K through T, because dot 3 is also raised. So let's take a sneak peek back to all of our cells again. And as you may have guessed, these are the cells that represent the word cat. Let's try another one. The first two cells we know are from letters A through J, because only the top 4 dots are used. The next two cells are from letters K through T, because dot 3 is also raised. And the final cell is from letters U through Z, since dot 3 and dot 6 are also raised. So let's take a sneak peek back to all of our cells again. And so if you guessed correctly, then you came up with the word jelly. Our final example is only 3 cells long. The first cell we can tell is different than the others. If you'll remember, when we encounter a cell with a pattern of raised dots that is shaped like a backwards L, it means we are turning letters into numbers. So the next 2 cells are from letters A through J, except we are going to read them as numbers. So let's take a sneak peek back to all of our cells again. And then we'll see that this is actually the series of cells that represent the number 64, which also happens to be the total number of cells used in Braille. And we'll look at the rest of these cells in the video for Grade 2 Braille. But for now, you've learned Grade 1 Braille in one lesson. This is how to memorize 50 of the 64 Braille cells in one lesson. 50 out of the 64 Braille cells have the exact same pattern of dots as letters A through J, with just a few small changes. Let's look at what's different about each row, and then we'll come back and see what letters all of these cells represent. The row directly below letters A through J is different in that it also has dot 3 raised. The next row has both dot 3 and dot 6 raised. The row below that just has dot 6 raised. And finally, the last row has the same pattern of dots as letters A through J, except they've all been dropped down one position. Now, to see what these cells represent. The row with dot 3 raised represents letters K through T. The row with both dot 3 and dot 6 raised represents the letters U through Z without the W, and then the words and, for, of, the, with. You'll notice that if a cell represents a full word, that word is shown in blue instead of black. The row with dot 6 raised represents 2-letter contractions, such as CH, GH, SH, etc. Contractions, by the way, are just a way of shortening words so that you don't have to use as many Braille cells to write them. In other words, instead of expanding the word, we want to contract it to save space. Also, some of the cells in this row, if used by themselves, represent whole words, such as TH is the word this if used by itself, and the OU is the word out if used by itself. Finally, the cell on the end is our missing W, and the W, if used by itself, represents the word will. The last row with all the dots from letters A through J dropped down one position also represents contractions, such as the letters EA and BE, or even the words to, was, and by. If you'll remember from the grade 1 Braille video, this row also represents punctuation marks, but we'll look at those and some rules for usage in later videos. For now, let's see if we can determine how to translate this Braille cell. Well, if we remember our story from the grade 1 Braille video, we can determine which of the letters A through J this cell most looks like. So let's see. Our story was about crossing a river. So we approach a bridge, but it's closed. No, it doesn't look like any of those. So we take the detour, but realize we're on empty. So we fill up with fuel, and there we go. Our cell looks like the fuel sign from the F, but it also has dots 3 and 6 raised, which means it's on the third row of the grid that we looked at earlier. So F is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th letter of the alphabet. So now we just have to figure out what the 6th cell is on the third row. Now the second row starts with K and goes through T. So the third row starts with U. So V is the second cell in that row. And then W is in a different row. So V is second. X is third. Y is fourth. And Z is fifth. Well, what was after Z? Oh yes, it was the word and. Because the words and, for, of, the, with finished out that row. Phew, now that was a lot of work. You know, it would be a lot easier if we could just remember the columns from our grid instead of just the rows. In other words, if we could remember what cells come below the F, we could just think to ourselves, okay, this looks like the fuel sign in the F, and below the F is P with dot 3 raised, and below that is the word and with dots 3 and dot 6 raised. Now that would make things a lot easier. But to do that, we would have to memorize all the cells that are below each of the letters A through J. Well, let's try and see if we can't do that. This time, we'll come up with a story like we did for letters A through J, and we'll try to remember each column as a word or a short phrase. To start out, let's say that you're a kid again and you're getting out of school. So you walk outside, and you see your dad, and he's holding your baby brother, and your dad's there to walk you home. You're so excited to see your baby brother, so you run up to him and hug him and say, "A coochie coochie coo," which will help us remember the A column. A, K, U, C-H, and E-A, or a coochie coochie coo. So you guys start walking home, and you pass that same scary house next to your school that you always pass on your way home every day. And you start to wonder if it's haunted. So you ask your dad, "Believe ghosts be?" Which helps us remember the B column. B, L, V, G, H, and B-E, or believe ghosts be? So your dad says, no, there's no ghosts in there. So you hurry past it, turn the corner, and you suddenly get so excited because you see that there's a comic show at the convention center, which helps us remember the C column. C, M, X, S, H, and C-O-N, or comic show at the convention center. So your dad's really excited too and wants to take you. So you get to the ticket booth and your dad hands them his Discover card. But unfortunately, they run it and hand it back saying, "I'm sorry, sir, we're going to have to deny this Discover," which helps us remember the D column. D, N, Y, T, H, which if used by itself is the word this, and dis, or deny this Discover. Oh man, now you can't go to the comic show, so you and your dad are pretty upset. But you try to cheer him up when you see a poster of your dad's favorite band coming to concert. So you point at it, and your dad looks at it and says, "Ozzy Oz, when?" Which helps us remember the E column. E, O, Z, W, H, and E, N, or Ozzy Oz, when? So your dad feels better, but he's still a little upset, so he decides you guys are just going to take the bus the rest of the way home. So you sit down at the bus stop, and since you have some time, your dad looks at you and says, "Finish your paper and edit it too," which helps us remember the F column. F, P, and ed, 2, or finish your paper and edit it too. So you say, okay, Dad. And then he gets up and goes to buy a magazine to read on the bus. But he gets over to the newsstand and is confused because they only have one kind of magazine for sale. He just sees GQ for sale, were, which helps us remember the G column. GQ for were, or GQ for sale, were. So the bus comes and you're riding home. But just before you get home, you see your best friend walking on the sidewalk and you ask your dad, hey Dad, can we hop right off outside his house? Which helps us remember the H column. HR of out his, or hop right off outside his house. So your dad says, sure, and you get off the bus. But your friend has to go inside. So you and your dad, holding your baby brother, keep walking home. But before you get home, you pass the zoo, and you love the owl at the zoo. So you ask your dad, is the owl in? Which helps us remember the I column. I-S-V, owl, I-N. Or, is the owl in? And your dad says, yeah, I see him. And now you do too, so you're excited. Well, you guys finally make it home, and you walk in the door, and your mom says, JT with Will W was by, which helps us remember the J column. JT with Will, which is also W, was, which is also by. Or JT with Will W was by, and that's our story. If you can remember this story, then you should be able to quickly figure out what any of the 50 Braille cells in the A through J pattern mean. Let's try a few examples. The first one has both dot 3 and dot 6 raised. So if we go back to our first story about crossing a river, we can tell that this cell looks like the detour sign, so it's in the D column. And if we remember our second story, we can recall that the D column is deny this discover, which is D-N-Y, this. So in that column, the third cell down with dots 3 and 6 raised is the letter Y. The next example has dot 6 raised. So if we remember our first story, this looks like the Harley rider in the H cell. And in our second story, the H was hopped right off outside his house, which is H-R of out his. So in this column, the fourth cell down with dot 6 raised is the OU, which if used by itself is the word out. Our last example also has dot 6 raised. And if we go back to our first story, this looks like the approach in the letter A. And A in our second story was a coochie coochie coo, or A-K-U-C-H-E-A. So in the A column, the fourth cell down with dot 6 raised is the CH. So by remembering these two stories about crossing the river and walking home from school, you'll be able to translate any of the 50 Braille cells that follow the pattern of dots of letters A through J. Now, one final note about these cells. We did leave out a few things to make them a little bit easier to memorize, so let's look at those things now. On the fourth row, the CH, when used by itself, means the word child. The SH, when used by itself, means shall. And the WH, when used by itself, means which. On the bottom row, the EN, when used by itself, means enough. Also, there are 5 double letter contractions on this row, which fall in the columns you would expect. BB, CC, DD, FF, and GG. These cells, when used in the middle of a word, represent these double letter contractions. We'll look more at rules of usage in a later video. But for now, you've seen how to memorize 50 of the 64 Braille cells in one lesson. This is Braille numbers, capital letters, and italics in one lesson. Starting where we left off in the last video, the top row of letters, A through J, is also used to represent numbers 1 through 9 plus 0. This is done by adding a special character before the letters that lets you know to read them as numbers. So let's add a gray column for this and a few other special characters that do not fit the same pattern of raised dots as letters A through J. The numbers character looks like a backwards L, so you can think of it as turning letters into numbers. The numbers character will come after a space at the beginning of a set of numbers, but if it is found at the end of a word, it is considered to be a contraction, representing the letters B-L-E. Now the number sign can be terminated by a space, but it can also be terminated by the letters sign. This sign is used when you have letters and numbers appearing together, and you need to differentiate which cells you should consider numbers and which cells you should consider letters. We'll look at an example of this in just a minute. The third cell down in our gray column is the capital sign. This cell is placed before a letter that you wish to capitalize, such as the first word in a sentence or the first letter in someone's name. If two capital signs are placed together, then you would consider the entire word that follows as capitalized. Finally, the last cell in our gray column is the italic sign, which also doubles as the decimal point when used with numbers. Let's look at a few examples of how to use these four new characters. First, let's take the number sign and look at an example of a phone number. In this case, we have the number sign followed by C-I-C, and then a hyphen which does not terminate the effects of the number sign, and then D-F-C-F. To translate these letters into numbers, we have to think where in the alphabet these letters appear. The C is the third letter in the alphabet, so it represents the number 3. The I is the ninth letter in the alphabet, so it represents the number 9, and so on.
So yeah, y'all like, comment, subscribe. You know what it is. It's your cousin, touch your boy, Charlotte Carolina. And like I said, reading is fundamental, but there's also other knowledge things that you can learn. So make sure you watch my video and prepare for the future. That's my whole channel, preparing for the future, the present, and learning about the past so it don't repeat itself. So you know what it is. We own it, we own it, we own it, we own it, we gone.